So I've been greatly enjoying Division 2 for the past month or so, ever since it went live. I was actually surprised by the amount of content in it and how it kept me going for a very long time, and actually it still does so to this day. But despite all of these praises, it still has some issues that I think should be discussed in a much greater detail. I'm mostly talking here about itemization, build diversity, and a few other concerns that I, as well as many others, have expressed in the past. And after all, bringing up these problems to light is what gets them addressed in the end, so that is why I wanted to make today's video. Hopefully it raises a little bit more awareness. But before moving on, I want to first announce that I have partnered with Instant Gaming for an amazing competition that is going to last for 2 weeks. You can take your chance at winning literally any game you want. It can be Division 2, Anthem, GTA 5, No Man's Sky, or any other game you type in the search bar on this competition. And to take part in it, all you need to do is follow the links in the description, sign up on their website, and complete all of the requirements for additional entries, including of course subscribing to this channel, following me and Instant Gaming on social media, and you're all set. Anyway, if you play Division 2 even at a moderate level, say for example reaching level 30, maybe World Tier 5, maybe getting yourselves a bunch of gear sets to play around with, you probably realize by now that even though the game has a much more complex build system, more stat combinations to keep an eye out for, and even more so quite a big selection of skills, the build diversity is lacking, to say the least. It's actually extremely low right now. It's almost like you're being forced into playing in a certain way and use a certain, combination of stats and skills, and for both PvE and PvP, you either go damage or go home, with very minor exceptions here and there. And I don't think I'm the only one that finds himself in the situation where I always have to hunt for gear with a handful of stats and passives on them, completely skipping the rest. And the current meta right now seems to be straight out red stats, like for example crit damage, crit chance, damage to elites, and your occasional armor and HP boost, while for talents, if you don't go with Unstoppable Force, Berserk, and Frenzy, and maybe another one over there, you're not going to have an efficient build at all, and you would be greatly suffering in the process. This means that after you take all of these red stats and a handful of gear talents, you're pretty much left with a completely useless stat, which is of course the skill power. Probably a lot of you even forgot this even existed in the game. Now the problem with skill power is twofold, and despite Massive's attempt to fix some of the issues with it, the situation doesn't seem to have been changing a whole lot. On one hand, speccing into a full skill power build means that you'll most probably be a dead weight to your team and will have a much harder time clearing out content, especially on higher difficulties. Someone even brought this issue up on Reddit and it had a ton of upvotes, and he makes a good point. If you use skill power as a supplement, it means that you can't use any of the skill mods in it. On the other hand, if you stack skill power, it means that you're pretty much going to sacrifice everything else to unlock some really underwhelming mods. There's nothing in between, and it shows honestly. Play any mission or stronghold and you're always going to see the same handful of builds and abilities, and there's not really that much diversity to go over at all. It also means that in order to go for a full skill power build, you're going to have to sacrifice some really powerful stats. As I was saying, the red stats like crit damage, weapon damage, damage to elites, and all of that will get sacrificed, and they are much more important than having some skill power. Now normally this wouldn't be such a huge problem. A lot of other games also have meta builds where certain abilities and armors and stat combinations outperform anything else, but in Division 2 there's a much bigger discrepancy between these builds, to the point where there's only one powerful build while the rest are not even worth checking. This means that a third of the stats in the game, specifically the ones skill power related, have close to no use in the current meta, if at all. And this brings me to the second point, which is of course all about the skills in the game. Currently Division 2 has 8 types of skills, or 8 skill categories, with anywhere from 3 up to 5 for each, all very distinct from one another. Normally this would provide a very wide build diversity, a lot of options to pick from, but just like in the previous section with the stats, here we find ourselves in the same situation where only a handful of skills are worth it, with the overwhelming majority of them being completely ignored. The vast majority of players and groups I play up with always use the same handful of skills, like Healing Cam Launcher, Reviver Hive, your occasional turret, some Seeker Mines or Drone, and that's pretty much it. And even within these categories, only a couple of them at best are being actually used. Shield is also, mostly for PvP, so largely used over there, but otherwise pretty much ignored in PvE, as it doesn't really have a good use. Overall, I can see why people avoid these skills honestly. Currently, skills don't really provide a sustained form of DPS or actual any combat advantage. Either they have long cooldowns, which makes them situational at best, or they are downright unreliable for damage. And with straight up weapon damage being much more important, you will mostly find yourself using skills to boost up either survivability or provide a little bit of more crowd control on choke points, for example. Everything else just stays in there to collect dust until hopefully Massive brings in something new or changes them a little bit. Finally, the third problem, and the much bigger one than the skills themselves, are the actual skill mods. I've talked about this briefly in the beginning of the video and also in a previous video I made a few days back, but I wanted to go a little more deep with this one. So Massive did a recent change to skill power requirements to not be as absurd as they were before, but in the process of doing so, they also brought down the amount of power yellow stats can provide. This effectively means that it was just a number squish and nothing more. You still need to be very invested in the skill power stats to make use of the powerful mods, completely sacrificing other gear stats like crit chance and damage, which are much more useful. What Massive should have done instead, and this is something the player base has suggested for quite some time now, is to either make mods scale with your current skill power. So if for example a mod provides 20% cooldown reduction on your ability and it requires 1000 skill power but you only have 500, then it should at the very least give you half of the benefits since you meet half of the requirements. So for example, instead of 20% cooldown reduction for 1000 skill power, you would get 10% cooldown reduction with the same mod but for 500 skill power. So that will make a little bit more sense. Another route they could have gone with is to simply remove the requirements altogether, which in the process would probably also mean nerfing them, like how it was done with the weapon mods, but at the very least you would get to use these mods and have them in your build, not just have them in your inventory collecting dust. I think I have over 200 mods right now. Most of them are just collecting dust in my stash and in my inventory. I'm not doing anything with them, mainly because they're pretty much useless. They don't have a use. They're just staying over there, not doing anything because I don't have enough skill power to use them, and I don't even want to have more skill power because currently it means that I will have to sacrifice other much better stats. But between these two, if I were to be perfectly honest, I would much rather prefer to go with the first route, where the mod itself or the bonus from the mod would scale with your current skill power. The second issue with the mods, also very big, is that the entire mechanic makes absolutely no sense. Where level 500 mods are vastly inferior to low quality blue ones, it means there's a huge problem. It comes to the point where you're pretty much forced to create a second character, keep it at low level, and farm blue mods because they provide much better stats at much lower requirements, if any at all. This is such a mess right now that I don't even know if I should even continue wasting time on my low level character, knowing that this clearly isn't something that the developers have intended and might even get patched or fixed at some point, essentially erasing all of my efforts in the process. But then again, if I don't do this, I'm pretty much left and stuck with not having any benefits from any of these mods, and I'm pretty much doing the opposite of optimizing my build. Again, scaling should also be applied to these mods as well, in a way that makes progressively higher quality ones and higher level mods better than the lower ones. I think this entire 1 stat allocation better than 3 stat allocation needs to be addressed or pretty much scrapped, or at the very least readjusted. And hopefully after these 3 main issues get addressed, we can finally move on to having a much better itemization in Division 2, a much better skill diversity, a much better build diversity, and more stuff to pick up from, and not all be stuck within the same parameters and do the same stuff over and over again. Anyway, it's not all bad news, and later today we're going to have another state of the game video that hopefully addresses at least some of these issues. Hopefully along with them we won't see another nerfing coming, because that's what happened in the previous patch. I think the current route Massive is taking isn't really the best, honestly. I think they're taking a lot of fun out of the game, a lot of potential fun, which is there, it was intended, it is in the game, it's just that it's not that useful, which means that nobody uses it. But if Massive, buffs certain areas of the game, brings up certain skill mods, certain skills and certain builds up, and provides them with the necessary buffs and removes some of the drawbacks, I think that is all that is needed in order to fix most of these issues. And this would also mean that a lot of the players will have a better time, trying to create builds, doing more content in order to create additional builds and all of that. And you rarely find yourself hunting for anything other than a handful of stats and talents, and that's pretty much it. But yeah, until the state of the game comes out, this is all that I had to say. I'm going to keep you guys updated with the upcoming updates. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, of course a like would be super appreciated. Also subscribe for more Division 2 content, and I'm gonna see you guys next time.